Okay, good evening, everyone. Okay, so this parsha is really, and not just this one next week, the week after, for the next couple of weeks, basically for 4 weeks, we have really powerful Torah readings, and there's just so many interesting things to pick. This week, I decided to talk about the ninth plague, the plague of darkness, and it's interesting in the history of humanity. Darkness is like famous for people are afraid of the dark. Things go bump in the dark. I mean, people tend to be afraid of the dark. So the idea of total darkness for 3 days or 6 days, according to most commentators, we're going to see that inside in a few minutes, believe it was a 6-day process of the darkness. That's really a scary proposition for most of humanity. So that bearing that in mind, I thought it's interesting to talk about some of the ideas about the plague of darkness. Before I begin, I want to give a bit of a caveat. There is a fascinating whole group of literature about trying to explain the plagues naturally, and it's fascinating, and it's worthwhile to look into it. But this week, I'm going to ignore the proposition that there may be natural explanations for the plagues. The most famous one is for darkness, specifically that there was a major volcanic eruption on an island called Santorini in the Mediterranean, and all of the dust and the pumice and all of the refuse from the volcano came and brought this darkness, which could be felt. Now, it was dark, and it was dark because of this material that was in the atmosphere. So that's a very popular idea. But for this evening, I'm going to be using the more traditional, earlier approaches. Not because I don't think these others have merit, but just because I want to focus on them, and I find some interesting ideas. Philosophically, religiously, in some of these commentaries we're going to do this evening. So more of the traditional ones. So the verse we're looking at, which is chapter 10 of Exodus, verse 21, the first of 3 verses introducing this plague. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So God speaks to Moshe, and he says, Nitei yadcha al hashamayim. Now, the English in front of us says, hold out your arm or extend your arm, al hashamayim. The Hebrew really means over the heavens. But we can't translate it that way. You're going to see a couple of commentaries that are going to deal with that usage. But so we have it here from the Jewish Publication Society translation, towards the heaven, the sky. Vayehi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, vayamesh choshech. That there should be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness which can be yamesh, limashmesh, that you can touch, that you can feel, that has a texture to it, if you will. So there was something very different about this darkness than regular darkness, which is lack of light. And it's that phrase that tries to declare that this phenomenon of darkness is different than regular darkness, lack of light, really is going to be the catalyst for all sorts of rabbinic speculation about the plague. And we start, like we almost always do, with the most famous of the commentaries, Rashi. So Rashi takes those 2 words at the end of the verse, Vayamesh choshech, and he says it signifies, and it, the darkness, shall darken for them the darkness to a higher degree than the darkness of night. That is, the darkness of night shall become even more black and dark. So Rashi takes that expression, not to say exactly that you could feel something in the air causing the darkness, but somehow this darkness was more complete than the regular darkness we're used to at night, which, especially in the ancient world, makes sense because we're not sure on what day of the month this took place. But if there's a moon outside, the darkness of night isn't total. We can see the stars well before street lights and light pollution. So the regular darkness of night can be pierced by some light. This darkness couldn't. Okay. Rashi goes on based on the next verse. And it was this deep darkness, which the translation is as darkness of gloom. It was choshech afela, this deep, profound darkness was 3 days. Okay, so Rashi comments, there was darkness of gloom when no man saw another during 3 days. And there was, moreover, another period of 3 days. So it's 3 days of deep darkness and 3 days of even deeper darkness, of 3 days darkness twice as thick as this, when no man rose from his place. So there's a first period of darkness when it was annoying, but the second one was so profound that we're going to see most of the commentary is going to say even light couldn't pierce it. It was so thick. We'll see a few explanations for that coming up very soon. And during that second 3-day period, nobody moved. They just stayed where they were. Were there people that died because of lack of water or food? I don't know, but perhaps. But people really suffered. They couldn't move during that second 3-day period. And why did he, God, bring darkness upon them? Because now there's 2 answers to this question, neither of which am I very happy with, I must be honest. But they're very popular. They both appear in the Midrash from early rabbinic sources, because there were wicked Israelites who had no desire to leave Egypt. And those died during the 3 days of darkness so that the Egyptians might not see their destruction. Now, we're going to see a comment later. I forget which one says it. I apologize. That basically 4/5 of the Jews died during the plague of darkness. This is a famous midrash on next week's parsha when it says the Jews left Egypt chamushim, just 1/5. The verse probably really means they were armed, but only 1/5 of the Jews left Egypt. 80% of the Jews weren't worthy of redemption. They wanted to stay in Egypt, and God killed them, executed them during the days of darkness. And the Egyptians couldn't see that this was going on because of the darkness. So God did it during the darkness, and that's why there was a plague of darkness. Now, I don't know how that works. I mean, if 80% of a population disappeared, and to expect people not to notice is like a little bit, I mean, that's asking a lot. Not only that, I mean, did we bury them? What did we do? Whatever we did with them, the Egyptians must have noticed that 80% of the Jews disappeared. Anyways, it's a famous midrash that Rashi quotes. But it's hard to take this midrash too literally because the numbers don't work. If there were 603,550 Jews that left Egypt, that's just the men. So the total population of those leaving Egypt was in the neighborhood of approaching 2 million people, adding children and women. To say that that's only 1/5, that there were really 10 million Jews in Egypt during that time, that's more people than we believe lived in Egypt at that time. The numbers don't work so well. So it's a fascinating midrash. And what's fascinating about it is 2 things. Number one, there are many times when the Jews have a way out, and there are many Jews who don't want to leave. I mean, we saw this in Europe. You know, there were Jews that saw the handwriting on the wall during the 30s, and but made no effort to leave. And only when it was too late did people start to, try to get out. And of course, we know there are many rabbis that said, "Don't leave; stay. You'll be safer here than in America or in Israel." Be that as it may, we see that there are many times when Jews don't do what they're supposed to do. And this number 1/5 is interesting because most historians believe that during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, that time called Shivat Zion, 1/5, one out of every 5 Jews from Babylonia came home to Eretz Yisrael. So this number of 20% seems to be recurring number in other events in Jewish history, for good or for bad. So that's answer number one. The second answer, why this plague of darkness? Like I said at the beginning, I think the idea of darkness is because people find darkness very scary. So God was doing punishments and plagues that were scary. But the other answer toward the end of this long Rashi is a further reason is that the Israelites searched and saw their jewels and their expensive items. And when they were leaving, asked them for their jewels. And the Egyptians said, "Oh, we don't have any. We have none at all in our possession." The answer, I know where you keep your diamonds and your rubies and your gold and your silver, because I went through your house during the darkness because it wasn't dark for me. I don't think this paints the Jews in such a good light. So I'm not happy with either of these famous midrashim for various reasons, but I'm just a reporter. Okay, many times I love these midrashim, but in this case, I'm not a big fan. Okay, the Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra has a few different ideas, and he begins by talking about this darkness, which was so thick you could feel it. Yefet. Now, Yefet is fascinating. Yefet is a person named Yefet ben Eli, and he was a biblical scholar who was a Karaite, not what we would say a proper Jew. He was one of those Jews in the early Middle Ages that didn't believe in Torah Shebaal Peh, the rabbinic interpretations of Torah. He only believed in the written law. No midrash, no commentary, just the text itself. So we considered them, a heretical sect. We weren't very happy with them. But the Ibn Ezra sometimes quotes them because some of them were scholars. And this Yefet that he mentions was a Karaite. So he said the word Vayamesh, this darkness that was, you could almost feel it, which may be felt, is like Vayamish, which means to depart. Its meaning is that the darkness to which they have become accustomed shall depart, and a thicker type of darkness shall come. So the Yamesh can mean to leave, to depart. And so the regular darkness went away, and this was a special darkness came in its place. Others say that V'yamesh is itself missing an aleph, because the word should be emesh. Emesh is a Hebrew word in fancy Hebrew that means last night. So I could say to somebody in a conversation, Eifahita Emesh, where were you last night? There was a party or there was a minyan and this person didn't show. Eifahita Emesh, where were you last night? So it is a proper Hebrew word that you don't hear that much in regular conversation. And so he says, this other interpreter who's anonymous, I believe the V'yamesh comes from the same root as, the word Emesh refers to the previous night. It was darker tonight than it was last night, okay? I believe the V'yamesh comes from the same root as Vayimash, Yimash Shesh, to grope. One cannot argue that Yimash Shesh comes from a double root, because with regard to something very similar, Scripture uses the word Yimishun, handle, and they have hands but not handles. They have hands, but handle not, but touch things not. Um, this is in Hallel. We say, oh, the idols of the Goyim, they have hands, yeshadayim, v'lo yamesh, but they can't feel anything. They can't handle things. So he says that's what the word means here. So this was a darkness which could be felt. Vayamesh refers to Egypt. Egypt being in the singular, so the all of Egypt couldn't feel it, could feel it. Now the meaning of Vayamesh Choshek is the Egyptians will feel the darkness with their hands. For the darkness shall be so thick that neither a candle nor a fire shall give off light. They saw not one another, neither by the light of day nor by candlelight, is proof of the aforementioned. In other words, it was so thick, it had like substance to it. So if somebody lit a candle, it wouldn't even pierce the darkness. I'm going to ask you for a second to turn to the back, and in the middle of the page is Hirsch, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Hirsch, writing in the middle of the 1800s. He's talking about that word too. Vayimash is the hefil of mush. Okay, maybe had dog sleds and they were mush. Okay, this is like Shimshon. This is how he explains it. During his blindness, asks a youth. If you remember the story at the end of book of Judges, Samson, Shimshon, is captured eventually by the Philistines, and they blind him, and they bring him to display in a big banquet. And he asks the young man, the boy that is leading him around, to bring him to two pillars so he can lean on the pillars. He can feel the pillars. And the word is v'yamesh. In other words, and then of course, Shimshon had, with his great strength, collapses those columns, and the entire building comes down on him and on the Philistine leaders. In other words, make it so that I feel the pillars. According to that, our verse means that the darkness caused the Egyptians to feel things. Now, he's not saying, like Rashi did, that nobody stirred. He's saying when they went around to know where they were, they would feel the chair or the table. They couldn't see anything, so they would feel things because they couldn't find their way with their sight. They could only identify things with their sense of touch. So that's where the feeling comes from. If you could go back to the front side, I'm going to skip Kasuto for about 3 minutes. I'll go back to him. I want to look at the Likutei Maharan. This is Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman is also talking about the thickness of the darkness. For when the Torah comes into a foul mouth, let's say, a terrible person is saying Torah things, something bad happens in their mouth. It becomes corporal and blackened there in his mouth. As it is written, Torah should not yamush from your mouth. It shouldn't become thick and difficult in your mouth, is the way that the Rabbi Nachman's explained it, corresponding to our verse, darkness yamash. In other words, the words of Torah should not become corporal and blackened by your mouth. It shouldn't become thick in things. So in other words, again, there was something of this darkness that was thick and black and dark and impenetrable. One more idea about this in the Malbim. And then we're going to leave the thickness of the darkness. And we'll talk about it a little bit more philosophically in a minute. The Abarbanel wrote that this was caused by a sea wind, which was very moist. It brought thick vapors all over Egypt, but it didn't become rain because of the nature of Egypt, which gets almost no rain. So the moisture stayed in these very thick cloud formations. This moist air was so thick and wet that it put out candles. So that's why if you lit a candle, it didn't help, because the air was so moist, nothing would catch fire. The darkness was a presence different from regular darkness, which is only the absence of light. So it is called Choshech Mamashi, a tangible, positive darkness, which is very difficult to pierce and must have been extremely oppressive on the Egyptians. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about the nature of the darkness, but more now about some other ideas about it. And I want to start with Umberto Cassuto, who is in the middle of the first page. Cassuto, who I like to quote from, he was a professor of of biblical literature at Hebrew University. He came to Eretz Yisrael about 1930, and until he died in the mid 40s, he was a professor at Hebrew U. So he makes a point that I think is important. Like each third plague, okay, a couple of years ago, one of the classes I gave described how there are three series of plagues. And we recognize the fact that the three plagues came in series of three in the famous abbreviation that we use at the Pesach Haggadah. Ditzach are the first three plagues, Adash are the middle three, Ba'achav are the last three, plus Makat Bechorot, which is outside. So there are three sets of plagues. The first set, which has to do with dust and water, it was below their feet. The second one, which is like diseases and animals, were like around us. And then the last series, starting from locusts, comes from the sky down on us. Locusts and the barad, the hail, and then the darkness comes down. So we're being enveloped, or the Egyptians are being enveloped below, around, and above by the series, the three series of Makot. So he says that in each one of the three parts, each third plague, there is no warning. In each series, the first one, numbers 1, 4, and 7, has a private warning for Pharaoh. Numbers 2, 6, and 8, no, 2, 4, 5, 2, 5, and 8. Sorry, my addition's getting bad. 2, 5, and 8 had a public warning to the entire nation. And then the third in each series, which are 3, 6, and 9, came without any warning whatsoever. When it says that there was darkness over Egypt, the intent is that there was a cloud of sand. The sand came from the desert and filled the air to the extent that one could feel it. The plague informed Egypt of God's power over forces the Egyptians considered gods, like the sun and like the sand. The desert itself was a god. And so, but I like how he gets in this idea about the 3, 6, and 9. And there is a system to the plagues. Okay. Now, at the bottom of the first page, Rabbeinu Bechaye. He's explaining Moshe's role in this particular event. God tells him, extend your hand towards the sky. A perusal of all verses will show that the expression al hashemayim, over the heaven, what's that mean? Occurs only in connection with two plagues. Hail, which barad, we just had a couple of days before this, then darkness. The reason this expression is used there is that though both of these plagues descended from the sky, the word Shemayim was not to be confused with Rakia, horizon. In other words, it didn't come from the visible sky around us. It came from a much higher location. The power which propelled these plagues into action was not one that is part of the domain of our normal sky above us. This is also the reason the Torah employs the kind of expression we find during the story of creation. In those plagues, it doesn't say Vahaya and there was. It says Vayehi, let there be. That's the same language that's used in the first chapter of Genesis, Bereshit, when God created the world. Let there be light. In other words, these particular events were very powerful to the extent it's almost like God is creating them at this moment. With the other plagues, the Torah uses words as vahaya, and it was, not let it be. And it was. In other words, when the lice came, they were the lice, they were already there. And they just came in, and on frogs, they just came in greater numbers. The letters in the word vayahi are the ones that depict matter coming into existence. And that is why Moses, with his staff, was able to work this kind of miracle. These miracles, the specifically coming down from heaven, the barad, the hail, and the darkness, were really a much greater level of miracle / plague than the others, because these were truly unusual, unique events. The plagues of hail and darkness materialized immediately after Moshe inclined his staff. He picked up his staff, and immediately hail came or darkness came, as if it's coming out of the staff that Moshe. I'm doing my hand like this because all I can think of is Charlton Heston when he had the staff. He would hold it up. I don't know how Moshe held the staff, but in the movie it was like, okay. The plague of locusts and the splitting of the sea occurred later, after God had made a wind blow. Now, sometimes the plague didn't come immediately, because to bring the arbe, a great wind came, and they showed up on the wind later. The same thing with the splitting of the sea. A great wind blew the water open, and the splitting was much later. But with darkness, it was immediate, almost like it was being created at that moment. These factors, plus the use of the expression yad, hand, which is a reference to God's great hand, explain why during the plague of darkness, the Israelites who were wicked were also stricken. And this is the only commentary I saw that mentioned this, that said, he's not bringing up so much the fact that they died, as we saw earlier. He's saying that if you had a Jew who was a Rasha, they were also in the dark. And even though the rest of the Jews had light, the Jew who was evil, Jew who wasn't Beseder, was in the dark. According to many sources, and again, this is what we've talked about before, only 20% of the Israelites actually qualified for redemption. There were actually 3 kinds of darkness, which the Torah speaks about in this portion. We have here the expression, Vayehi choshech, and there was, or let there be, like it's created. Vayamesh choshech, they could feel the darkness. Vayehi choshech afela, and let there be a very deep, profound darkness. Darkness will materialize, darkness will be tangible, and there was a thick darkness. Actually, these 3 descriptions of darkness correspond to 3 other terms for darkness from the Torah. The Torah sometimes uses one of 3 different expressions to mean darkness. One is alata, afela, arafel. The alatah was the darkness experienced by Avram during the covenant of the parts. It says a deep darkness came upon Avram. He went to sleep and then saw this vision, which predicted that the Jews would go into slavery and would come out with a great geula, redemption. Afela is the darkness which occurred in Egypt, whereas Arafel, with an ayin, is the darkness which engulfed Moshe on his ascent to Mount Sinai. So it says he entered the darkness so no one else could see where he was. So there are different terms for thick darkness in different places, and all of them are being referred to by the different languages used here. The meaning of the expression "vayamesh choshech" is that the darkness will continually deepen. It got deeper and deeper day by day. The word is related to emesh, last night. The Torah means that this darkness will be deeper than last night's darkness. It was dark last night. Tonight's going to be darker. The next day, it was darker last night. It's going to be even darker. So each one of the 6 days got progressively darker. Alternatively, the word is related to the expression lo yamish. He would not remove. It means that even after the departure of the natural darkness of night, this darkness would not lift. There was no morning. There was no sunrise, no dawn. This proves that the plague of darkness commenced in the morning when it was light already. Had it begun at night, the Egyptians would simply have thought this was a night lasting for 3 or 6 days. The miracle would then not have had the same desired effect. So, in other words, it came suddenly and got progressively darker. So, in other words, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Moshe raises the staff, the darkness descends, and this darkness is greater than the darkness we had last night, and the next day will be even darker. Okay. Rabbi Frand, the Mohammed Yehuda suggests a fundamental difference between Makat Choshech and all the other plagues. There's something special about the darkness. Now, I think what was special about the darkness is I think it's scary. I think there's nothing that, out of all the plagues, nothing was scarier to the average human being than this profound darkness. But he has another idea. The other 9 plagues were punishments. They were divine slaps to break the will of Pharaoh. While punishing, there is well-established principle. Punishments are not administered without prior warning. Choshech was not a punishment. There was no prior warning. It can't be a punishment. Darkness was itself the warning for what was going to come next, which is the killing of the firstborn. The warning was, Pharaoh, you are blind. You cannot see what is happening before your very eyes. You should see what is happening to you and to your people. You should give in to Hashem. Open your eyes, realize how foolish you've been, and make a deal with Moshe Rabbeinu. The plague of darkness was a symbolic message. There are none so blind as those who will not see. And who was it that wouldn't see? That was Pharaoh. And this is an interesting, Rabbi Frand and many other rabbis talk about how the plagues were there specifically to guide Pharaoh. I like that idea, and I've used it, but I'm not sure that it's totally true. But it's an approach that a number of commentaries have, that every one of the plagues should be looked at in direct relationship to what it was saying to Pharaoh. Back in Breshit, when God tells Abraham, chapter 15 of Genesis, that they're going to be strangers in a strange land, he says, and the people that afflict them will be punished. It's not just the king. I really think that the Egyptians themselves were being punished. But Rabbi Frand and a lot of people have this point of view that the plagues were specifically an educational device for Pharaoh specifically. Okay, it's possible, but I like it that it was all of Egypt deserved these punishments, because all of them were truly nasty to us. The Netivot Shalom, who was the Slonimer Rebbe and died in the year 2000, we've mentioned him before, he says, when Moshe raised his hand to heaven to bring down the darkness. He was really bringing the most spiritual atmosphere on the earth. He wasn't bringing darkness. He was bringing a ruach, a spirit of kedusha. And the Egyptian world, the Egyptian territory, was being imbued with this spiritual reality that permeated the atmosphere. It wasn't darkness per se. As a result, it was darkness for Egyptians. In other words, if I buy into spirituality and I buy into God's power, then I can see through this. But if I say, oh, there's no such thing as God, oh, the gods of the Jews are phony, then I can't see anything because the spirituality, this ruach, the spirit that was brought down onto the country, I couldn't see it. And therefore, I couldn't look through it. For me, it was darkness. However, if a villain enters paradise, if a villain somehow could go to Gan Eden, right? For him, it is darkness. Now, many Hasidim, the Nativ Shalom, of course, was the Slonim Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe. Many Hasidim have these ideas that heaven and hell are the exact same thing. It's just that the good people love it and the bad people find it unbearable. Like it's, all day long is Torah classes, right? So the people that wanted to go to heaven say this is fabulous, and the people that weren't into Torah learning, they find it unbearable. There's another famous example of it, that in heaven and in hell, the exact same thing is going on. People are seated at long tables, and there's delicious food on the tables, but all of the people sitting there no longer have elbows. Their arms are just straight. So if you try to pick up food, you can't put it in, you can't get it to your mouth. So in the table that's hell, it's the exact same thing in both rooms. This is heaven, this one's hell. In hell, everybody's sitting there miserable. In heaven, everybody is feeding each other. Because even though I can't get to my mouth, I can get to the mouth of the person next to you. So what the Nativot Shalom is saying here is a very popular Hasidic idea, that it's the exact same situation. It's just that for good person, it's fabulous. For bad person, it's Gehenna. It's purgatory. It's heck. It's hell. Whatever you want to say. Okay? Because he can find no physical pleasure. That's all he likes. Therefore, God told Moshe to bring down the heavenly light. What happened when Moshe raised his staff, according to the Nativot Shalom, was Moshe didn't bring darkness. He brought spiritual light down to the world. And the Jews just loved it. It was fabulous. It enhanced their spirituality. But for the Egyptians, it was profound darkness because they saw nothing in it. They just couldn't in any way see what was so beautiful about this. And for them, it was just darkness. It's a fascinating idea, that heaven and hell are the exact same thing. It's just that different people experience it in totally different ways. And he's saying that was true of this plague. Therefore, God told Moshe that I just read that. That's why it says that there was light in the dwellings of Israel. When the Jews are together in Kedusha, a great light descends upon them. In other words, the same phenomenon was happening for Jew and for Gentile. It's just the Jews found it glorious light, and the Gentiles found it profound, obscure darkness. How this works, on a physical level, I have no idea. There's one other idea that's actually brought down by the Torah Tamima that says that the darkness was something you could feel because what happened was the Egyptians grew these like cataracts on their eyes. In other words, there was something that grew on their eyes for those 3 or 6 days, and they couldn't see. But really, there was no darkness. It's just that they were being punished. So the idea is some people say that what was going on was a relative situation, total darkness for the Egyptians, beautiful light, spiritual light for the Jews. Okay. And the last quote I have is from an article written by Shira Smiles. Shira Smiles is wonderful. She does a lot of classes. She lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh. My wife and I got to meet her not that long ago.
I remember as a little girl.
And my wife remembers when she was a little girl in Elizabeth.
No, in Yonkers.
Oh, in Yonkers. She was a congregant of Rivka's father's shul in Yonkers. And she's very, very nice. And she gives terrific classes. She really, and this first time I've had her on a sheet. But I saw this article she wrote and I grabbed the bit. And she comments, and I think the first statement that she makes is true. The most enigmatic of plagues was darkness. There's the most, as we've seen as we go through the sheet, there are just so many different interpretations of what's going on in the darkness. I mean, even forgetting about the natural phenomena, perhaps, which we didn't really delve into, but all of these different variations on how the darkness was brought about and how the different reactions to it. So it is the most enigmatic. It's the least simple of the plagues. Two of Tanaim pose contradictory theories as to the origin of the darkness. Rabbi Yehuda, it's actually a famous midrash. Rabbi Yehuda claims that this darkness originated in the highest realms of heaven, in absolute purity. This is very much like the Slonim Rebbe, like Nativot Shalom. It was really something beautiful but only spiritual people could benefit from it. So it was like great for the good guys and horrible for the bad guys. On the other hand, Rav Nehemiah claims that the darkness emanated from the deepest regions of Gehenna, that really it came from, the depths, where, the dark, deep depth. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this darkness was parallel to the state of nothingness before creation. And again, she doesn't say it, but we already saw that the language for the darkness to come was Vayehi, let there be, quoting the way Hashem expressed the creation in the first chapter of Bereshit. So what happened was this darkness was what existed before God said, Vayehi or, let there be light. But since the wicked are unworthy of witnessing such purity, Rav Nehemiah claimed, purity, they couldn't see it, okay? Rav Nehemiah, on the other hand, claims this darkness must be a part of death. It's a certain amount of death. This isn't surprising because people say that sleep, I shouldn't say people, there are midrashim that say that sleep is 1/60th of death, that there is something similar between sleep and the big sleep. This darkness must be part of death, punishment, and destruction. It was so bad. So in other words, what are we going to emphasize? The good part or the bad part? Rabbi Yehuda is saying this darkness was good for the Jews, so therefore it must come from a positive place. Rabbi Nehemiah says it's really terrible for the Egyptians, it must come from a bad place. Okay, no, I can't say either one's right or wrong, but you can see the totally different perspective that they're taking. But if light is truth and clarity, and darkness is confusion and a distorted view of reality, which is what many of us believe, it was this confusion, inner doubt, and turmoil that paralyzed the Egyptians and prevented them from moving forward. The darkness according to this interpretation, is not so much a punishment, it's a description of the way the Egyptians were living their lives. They were living their lives in darkness. They couldn't see what was right. And therefore, they were wandering around in darkness. Beautiful idea. In contrast, the Jews experienced heightened awareness. Us noticing the confusion amongst the Egyptians gave us more confidence. Oh, we, Baruch Hashem, we see the light. We understand. We know the right way to live. We understand the right way to be. And for us, it was a confidence building experience. Seeing the light is not only literal, but also metaphorical. Is the word metaphorical? Isn't it metaphoric? Metaphorical?
I would have thought metaphorical,
Oh, okay.
but you
Fine.
wanna look it
No,
up?
no, no. My wife is my editor. Okay. For one who can't see the light has no understanding. It's a terrific metaphor. He can't see the light. So, according to Shira Smiles, what's going on here is a metaphor for good and evil throughout history, throughout life. We must open our eyes, for we are also submerged in darkness. And Hashem is waiting for us to chop it, to understand it, to open our eyes, to see what's the right thing to do, how's the correct way to behave. Do we observe the natural world Hashem created? Are we growing as nature grows with Hashem's command? Or are we oblivious and static? It's so important to always look around and see the possibilities and then take advantage of them. Are we yearning for redemption today? Do we have our bags packed and a plan in place so that we can leave the moment Mashiach arrives? This reminds me of a couple of weeks ago when I mentioned the Mashiach clause in some people's leases here in Yerushalayim. That in Yerushalayim it started sometime around 2010, and now it's quite popular. When people live in Chutz La'aretz and they rent out apartments in Yerushalayim, there's a clause in it that if Mashiach comes, they have to give up the apartment immediately so that the owners can come from, Teaneck or wherever, or Golders Green, so they can take over the apartment. Okay. And now, are we really getting ourselves ready? Are we really in the right spiritual frame of mind? What was it that allowed Bnei Israel to be redeemed then in Egypt? It was nothing more than an intense desire for that redemption, a desire we need today as well. The time before the great light of redemption will be revealed is the darkest time. I would say in, but I just cut and pasted. So this is what she said. So it's so important to see that the plague of darkness is also a metaphor, that the Jews had come from darkness into the light. We were ready for redemption, and the Egyptians were still wallowing in the darkness. And the question is, in our own lives, are we reaching towards the light? Are we involved in moving forward spiritually? Spirituality is light. Physical stuff is dark. Are we moving forward in a more spiritual state of mind? And it's an important question to ask. And Chazal, our sages, when they make that claim that so many Jews didn't leave Egypt, which I don't think can be taken literally, but I think, again, the concept, the symbolism is very powerful. You can only be redeemed if you're ready for it, if you've worked towards it. And the darkness, according to Shira smiles. This darkness represented where the Egyptians were and simultaneously where the Jews were. And we were in the right place, ready to be redeemed. And then redemption comes. I think that Shira smiles means that when we, I have to, oh, wait a minute, I have to get to the chat. I think that Shira smiles means that when we are in the darkest times, the light will come. I'm not sure she's saying that. I know that there are rabbis that say that. I think her point is that the people that get redeemed are the ones who are moving towards the light already. Yes, the times may be darkest, and we say in English, it's darkest before the dawn. I don't think that's true. But I mean, we say that expression, it's always darkest before the dawn. That's not true. Really, before the dawn, there's Amud Shacha, you can see a little light. But I mean, we say that. And there are Rabbanim that say that there are the sufferings, the pains before Mashiach comes. I can't disagree that position exists, but I think that what Shira Smiles is talking about is that the plague of darkness is showing us before the Geula came that the Jews were ready for it because they could see the light and the Egyptians couldn't. And this idea that somehow the light for the Jews and the darkness for the Egyptians was the exact same phenomenon I don't know if it works. I don't know if it's true, but I think the symbolism of it is very, very powerful. And thank you, Gail, for the comment, because there are many, many Rabbanim that say that the last footsteps of Mashiach is going to be very painful and very difficult. And if that's true, we're ready. We're ready. We're there. I mean, these last year has been wow, very, very tough on all of us. But the idea that's very powerful is redemption comes to those who are ready for it and who have worked up to it. And I think that last idea that Shira Smiles pushes very strongly is extremely powerful. And I hope it's something that that informs our lives. I think that we are people who are looking for the spirituality, and that hopefully will be an important step on the road to Geula, redemption, and Biat HaMashiach, and time
Yeah.
of Mashiach.
Amen.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining this evening. Let
you
people
very
know
much.
that I'll have it up, please God, tomorrow morning. And Erev Tov.
Erev Tov. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Very welcome. Bye-bye.